Hi. My name is Rohan Malhotra. I am 50 years old. I live in Atherton, California. I run a software company called Archicore Technologies that I built from nothing, on a kitchen table, on a laptop that needed a new battery, in an apartment in San Francisco that my wife and I could barely afford. I have been successful by most measurements that the world uses to measure success. I have also been betrayed in a way that I would not wish on any person in this room. This is my story. All of it. The parts that make me look good and the parts that make me look like a fool and the parts that still, even now, even at 50 years old with everything I know, are hard to say out loud. I am telling it because I think someone here needs to hear it. Maybe that someone is you. So sit down. Get comfortable. This is going to take a while. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing remarkable about it. My father worked at a manufacturing plant. My mother cleaned houses 3 days a week and cooked the best food I have ever eaten on the other 4. We were not poor in the way that makes the news, but we were the kind of family where every purchase had a conversation before it happened. New shoes were a discussion. A school trip required planning. There was no margin for mistakes. What we had instead of margin was expectation. My parents, God, I love these people, my parents decided very early that I was going to be educated. Not just schooled. Educated. My mother would sit with me at the kitchen table every evening and go through my homework with the focus of someone defusing a bomb, even when the subject was something she herself had never studied. My father would come home from the plant, still tired, still carrying the smell of metal and machine oil, and ask me what I had learned that day. Every day. Without fail. They believed in something they couldn't entirely see yet. They were building toward a future they were taking on faith. I did not want to let them down. So I studied. I studied the way other kids played sports, with complete commitment, with genuine love for the thing itself. I loved mathematics. I loved the way a proof closed. The way a complex system, understood correctly, became simple. I loved computer science because it was mathematics you could make do something. I got a perfect score on my SAT. I applied to Stanford on what felt like a dare I was making to myself. They said yes. I remember my mother's face when the letter arrived. I remember my father taking the letter from my hands, reading it, setting it carefully on the table, and then walking to the backyard and standing there alone for a few minutes. When he came back and his eyes were red. He never cried in front of us. That was the only time I ever saw him come close. I packed 2 suitcases and got on a plane for the first time in my life and flew to California. I was 18 years old. I had $400 in my bank account. I knew absolutely nobody. And I was the happiest I had ever been. Stanford in those years was, I don't know how to describe it to someone who wasn't there. It was like being dropped into a river that was moving faster than any river you had ever swum in. Everyone around you was brilliant. Everyone around you had something. The kid across the hall from me in the dorm had already started and sold a company. The girl in my calculus section had published a research paper at 16. I was the scholarship kid from Ohio who filled notebooks. I loved it. I put on my glasses every morning and went to class and took notes and stayed late and asked the professors questions after lecture and ate whatever was cheapest in the dining hall and thought I was living the best possible version of my life. And then, in the second week of my freshman fall semester, I saw Maya Sharma for the first time. I'm going to pause here for a second. Because I want to be honest with you. Not about what she looked like, I'll get to that. But about something more important. When I tell you about Maya, I am telling you about a person I loved completely for a long time. And I am also telling you about a person who did things to me that I still, at 50 years old, have to work to understand. Both of those things are true at the same time. I am not going to pretend she was a monster from the beginning. She was not. She was a real person, complicated, and what happened between us was real. Okay. Back to the story. Maya Sharma walked through the main gate of Stanford on a Tuesday morning and I happened to be sitting on a bench nearby eating a granola bar and reading a textbook. I looked up. She was genuinely stunning. I am not a person who talks about appearances very often, but I want you to understand this because it matters to what happens later. She was tall, dark eyes, this hair that fell past her shoulders, and she walked with the absolute confidence of someone who had been the most beautiful person in every room she had ever entered and had simply accepted this as permanent fact. Boys on that campus lost their minds over her. I watched it happen daily. She would walk across the quad and conversations would stop. Guys would find reasons to be near wherever she was studying. Senior students who had never once looked at freshman girls suddenly had business near her dorm. She ignored all of it. Not rudely, exactly. More like, they simply did not register. She looked through admirers the way you look through a window at whether you have already decided is not relevant to your plans. Her roommate Kayla, I got to know Kayla later, told me that Maya had a private name for all the boys who pursued her. She called them the Noise. I was not planning to be anything. I was not planning to introduce myself. I was a scholarship kid from Ohio with ink on my fingers and a granola bar, and I had approximately zero illusions about what category I belonged in relative to Maya Sharma. And then one afternoon, maybe 3 weeks into the semester, she sat down across from me in the corridor outside the calculus lecture hall. No greeting. No introduction. She just sat down, looked at me directly, and said, "Explain Fourier transforms to me." Not please. Not excuse me, could you? Just the flat, clean demand of someone who had never needed to make requests politely because the world had always moved toward her. I looked at her over my glasses. I thought, okay. Let me see if you are actually serious about this, or if you just want the answer handed to you. I said, do you want the textbook version, or do you want to actually understand it? She said, what's the difference? I said, about 3 hours. She looked at me for a second. Then she said, then we better start. And we sat there until the building lights came on in the evening. I'll be honest with you, within about 20 minutes of teaching her, I forgot everything else. She was sharp. Genuinely, surprisingly sharp. She had not been struggling because she lacked ability. She had been coasting her entire academic life because nothing had ever demanded that she actually work. And when I pushed her, when I gave her the real version of the concept, the hard version, the version with the actual depth, she leaned in. She did not retreat. She got that look on her face, this brightness, like a window being opened, and she said okay, give me more. I thought about her that night considerably more than I had expected to. She came back the next day. And the day after. And the day after that. Pretty soon it was every day, and pretty soon the studying was just the excuse and we both knew it. She started telling me things. Real things. About her family in San Jose, about her parents' expectations, about the ambition she carried that was bigger than she usually let people see. She had this dream of running her own company someday, not working for someone else's vision, but building her own. Being the architect. I understood that completely. With me, the armor would come off. Not all the way, Maya always kept something behind glass, even with me, even later. But enough. Enough that I could see the real person, the one underneath the beauty and the arrogance, and that person was, she was interesting. She was genuinely interesting. My friend Marcus noticed before I was willing to admit it to myself. Marcus pulled me aside one day and said, Rohan, brother, I need you to understand something. Maya Sharma does not sit with anyone. She has turned down the starting quarterback. She has turned down 2 student body presidents. She walked away from a guy whose family owns half of Houston without blinking. And she comes to your table. Every single day. I said, we study together, Marcus. He looked at me with this expression, you know the one, the expression a good friend makes when you are saying something so obviously untrue that they don't even know where to start correcting you. Some laughter from the audience. He said, "She doesn't look at you like a study partner, man. She looks at you like a problem she has personally decided to solve." I went home that night and thought about it. More than I should have. More than was productive. Because the truth was, something was happening. I could feel it the same way you feel weather changing. That particular shift in the air that tells you something is coming. A whole year passed like that. A year of studying that wasn't really studying, and walks around campus that were just excuses to keep talking, and meals in the dining hall where we would both forget to eat because the conversation was more interesting. And then one Wednesday in October she found me sitting at the fountain and she sat beside me, and after a moment of quiet she said, "I like you, Rohan. Not because you helped me with calculus. The actual you. I've been thinking about it for a long time and I'm done not saying it." I looked at her. And I said, "I like you too, Maya." She laughed. This real laugh, the unguarded one, the one almost nobody got to hear. And she leaned her head on my shoulder. And I, a scholarship kid from Ohio on a bench at Stanford with $400 in his bank account, I thought, I am the luckiest person alive. Part of that was true. We graduated. We moved to San Francisco. She went into consulting. I started Archicor on our kitchen table. I want to tell you about those early years because I think they matter to understanding everything that came later. We were happy. Genuinely, simply happy. Not the performed happiness that people put on social media. The real kind, where you come home tired and the person who is there is the right person and the apartment is small and you don't care. Maya was excellent at her work. I want to say that clearly. She had a mind for corporate dynamics, for reading rooms, for understanding what people really meant underneath what they were saying. She made partner faster than almost anyone in her cohort. I was proud of her. I told her so regularly. Archicor grew slowly at first. The right kind of slow, the slow that means you are building something solid. I had built an enterprise project management and analytics platform that mid-size companies found genuinely useful. Not flashy. Not the kind of thing that gets you on magazine covers. Just useful. Reliable. The kind of software that people stop noticing because it works so consistently they forget it could not work. We moved from Mission District to Pacific Heights. Then to Palo Alto. Then, when I was 39 years old, we bought a house in Atherton. I remember walking through that house for the first time. Big yard. 4 bedrooms. Quiet street. And I thought about my father standing in the backyard in Ohio when the Stanford letter arrived. I thought, "Dad, look. Look what we built. We had everything. The house. The cars. The savings. The company was doing genuinely well, bringing in serious revenue, attracting the attention of private equity. And then, 3 years before the accident, I hired Riyan Kapoor. He takes a slow breath. I want to be very precise about how I describe Riyan, because precision matters here. Riyan was 27 years old when I hired him. Good-looking. Well-dressed. Easy in rooms, easy with people. The kind of person who makes a strong first impression and a moderate second one. He was adequate at his job, managed my calendar, my correspondence, the administrative machinery. I paid him well. I gave him raises when it seemed warranted. I gave him more responsibility as time went on because he handled what he was given without obvious problems. He was, as far as I understood, a loyal employee. He was having an affair with my wife. Silence. I did not know. I am going to say that again because I want it to be absolutely clear. I did not know. I have had people suggest to me, carefully, the way people suggest things they don't want to say directly, that perhaps I must have felt something. That some part of me must have known. No. I did not know because I trusted Maya the way I trusted myself. Because when you love a person completely and build a life with them and they have been, for over a decade, the most reliable thing in your existence, you do not spend every morning checking whether that reliability is still true. You trust it and you build on top of it. That trust was the most catastrophic thing about me. It was also, I think, the most honest thing about me. I am still not sure what that means. I have spent 9 years trying to figure it out. December. Tuesday evening. I was on my way home from the office. Gerald, my driver, was taking the 101 south. A truck ran a red light. I don't remember the impact. I was unconscious before the paramedics arrived. Gerald survived with a broken wrist and a cut above his eye. He called Maya from his own phone because mine had shattered. 3 vertebrae. Lower spine. Serious nerve damage. The surgeon at Stanford Medical Center sat across from Maya in the ICU waiting room and told her that my life was going to be permanently different in terms of physical mobility. Wheelchair. Possible partial recovery with intensive rehabilitation. No guarantee of anything beyond that. I pause here sometimes when I tell this story because there is a lot in this part that is hard to move through quickly. So let me just say, losing the use of your legs is a specific kind of grief that I don't think I can fully explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. It is like losing a country you were born in. The country of standing up when you want to stand up. Of walking across a room. Of climbing the stairs in your own house. You don't know it's a country until the border closes. I grieved it. Properly, deeply, in the way that things need to be grieved if you are going to move forward. And then I stopped grieving it, because I am not built for staying still. But during that time, during the hospital, during the first terrible weeks, Maya was there. Every day. She would sit beside the bed and talk to me and bring me things and tell me about the office and ask about what I needed. And when I was finally conscious enough to understand the full picture of what had happened, she sat beside me, held both my hands, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "I have these words memorized. I will have them memorized until the day I die." She said, "Don't worry, Rohan. I'm not going anywhere. We will handle this together. You are not alone in this. I promise." I believed her. She was lying. She had been lying before that moment, and she was lying in that moment, and she would continue lying for 21 more years. But I did not know it. And so her words became the foundation I rebuilt on. False ground, but I didn't know it was false, and so it held me up. And I came home from the hospital and I reorganized the entire remote operation of Archicor and I ran the company from my home office and I kept building. I asked Maya to run the physical office in my absence. I gave her signing authority. Access to all the accounts. The ability to approve expenses and manage vendor relationships and represent Archicor in every room I could no longer enter. I trusted her with everything. She used that trust in 2 ways. The first way, she continued the relationship with Riyan. Now with the freedom that my absence from the office created. He was still my employee. Still in my building. Still cashing my paychecks. While sleeping with my wife. The second way, she began redirecting company funds. Slowly. Methodically. Inflated vendor invoices. Manipulated expense accounts. Payments to a shell LLC in Delaware that took forensic accountants months to trace. Not enough in any transaction to trigger an automatic flag. Enough, over years, to add up to millions. She was not just betraying me. She was robbing me. He pauses. I am 50 years old and I have told this story several times now and it still, in this particular moment, requires me to stop for a second. Because I want you to hold the reality of that. The woman who held my hands in a hospital room and made me a promise. Coming home every night. Asking how my day was. Sleeping in our house. And simultaneously, methodically, stealing from the company I had built from nothing on a kitchen table. Both things happening. At the same time. In the same life. Okay. I'm okay. Let's keep going. 8 months after the accident, Maya told me she was pregnant. He smiles. A complicated smile. I want to describe to you what I felt in that moment, because I think it's important. I felt like the ceiling had opened up and let light in. That's the only way I can describe it. I had spent months accepting that my life had gotten smaller. Narrower. That certain things were gone. And suddenly here was this information that said, no. No, there is something coming that is going to make everything larger than it has ever been. A baby. My baby. I took both her hands. My eyes were full. I said, a baby. She said, a baby. I called my mother that night and she cried for 15 minutes and then immediately asked about names. I chose Aryan. It means noble. Honorable. I wanted my child to carry in his own name a reminder of what he was supposed to become. I wanted to go to every prenatal appointment. I was already planning the logistics, the accessible transport, the scheduling. I could make it work. And Maya said, gently, every time I brought it up, you don't need to exhaust yourself. Riyan drives right past that medical center anyway. You rest. You manage the office calls. I'll handle the appointments. His voice is steady but something behind his eyes shifts. I accepted this. I was, in some honest part of myself, quietly relieved. A crowded medical facility in a wheelchair, the logistics, the stairs, the physical effort. Maya was being protective. Thoughtful. Managing one more thing so I didn't have to. I did not ask why my executive assistant needed to accompany my pregnant wife to her prenatal checkups. I did not ask, because asking would have required me to imagine something that I had no architecture for imagining about Maya. Aryan was born on an April morning in Palo Alto. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Completely healthy. The nurse brought him to me in the hospital room and I held him with hands that were shaking, not from weakness, just from the enormity of the moment, and I looked at his small face and I saw myself in it. The shape of the nose. The line of the brow. I said, hey. I have been looking forward to meeting you. He stops. Collects himself. He wasn't mine. I know that now. But in that hospital room, on that April morning, he was the most mine thing in the world. And I loved him from that moment completely and without condition. That love was real. Everything that used to be real still was. That is the thing about being deceived, the love you felt is not retroactively erased. You loved truly. The other person was lying. Those are two separate facts and they coexist and you have to learn to hold them both without letting one cancel the other. It took me a long time to understand that. I raised Aryan. I want to say those 3 words clearly and let them stand on their own for a second before I continue. I raised Aryan. I read to him every night. Picture books first, then chapter books, then novels we would discuss at the dinner table like 2 people with opinions, because by 10 years old he had opinions worth discussing. I taught him chess at 6. I taught him basic programming at 9, on a laptop he had picked out himself, choosing every color option with extreme seriousness. I coached his middle school robotics team for 3 years, operating the whiteboard with a long pointer from my wheelchair while 12-year-olds argued about servo motors and looked to me to settle it. I was at every school event. Front row. Every time. The teachers all knew me, the dad in the wheelchair, the one who remembered every detail from every previous meeting and asked the follow-up questions. I was there. And Aryan, I want to tell you about Aryan, because this is also his story. He was a genuinely good kid. Sharp, like me in some ways. Patient with complexity. He had his mother's directness and dark eyes and the particular way she held her chin up when she was confident about something. He had my tendency to fill notebooks. He studied finance at UC Berkeley and came home on weekends and sat in my home office and argued with me about market structures and technological disruption, and I would think. This This is what I built everything for. Archicor kept growing during those years. We went from 200 employees to more. We opened a New York office. The private equity firm increased their stake. I became, quietly and without making much of it, one of the more successful founders of my generation in Silicon Valley. Not the flashiest. Not the most written about. But one of the steadiest. Which is rarer and ultimately more valuable. And through all of it, 21 years, Riyan Kapoor remained at the company. Still employed. Still, from my limited visibility, a competent operational presence. Promoted. Given raises. He was my employee. He was my wife's lover. He was my son's biological father. All three things simultaneously. For 21 years. I did not know. When Aryan turned 20, I started the process of formalizing what I had always intended. I was 53 at the time. Healthy. No crisis. But I was a man who had learned, from a truck on Highway 101, that plans need to be made before circumstances make them urgent. So I engaged my personal attorneys and my estate planning team, and over several months we assembled the documentation that would transfer to my son what I had spent my adult life building. The majority stake in Archicor. The Atherton house. The investment portfolio. A commercial property in San Francisco I had owned for a decade. All of it. To Aryan. My son. I told Maya about it over dinner one evening. I said, when Aryan turns 21, I want to formally transfer the company to him. I'll stay involved, I'm not going anywhere, but it should be his to grow. He has the right mind for it. Maya looked at me across the table. An expression moved across her face that I did not know how to read. She said, of course. Whatever you think is right. He pauses. I understand now what that expression was. It was the look of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment for a very long time and has just heard the starting gun. Aryan's 21st birthday. We celebrated at the house on a Saturday, family, close friends, the easy warmth of people who have known each other long enough to be comfortable. Aryan gave a short speech that was better than he knew. I watched him from across the room and felt, content. Properly content. The way you feel when you look at something you built and it is standing and it is good. The formal transfer ceremony was scheduled for Monday morning. Attorneys coming to the house. Documents on the desk. Everything prepared. Sunday evening I organized a celebratory dinner at a restaurant in downtown Palo Alto. The Archicor senior team. A few of Aryan's closest friends from Berkeley. Nice place. Quiet. Good food. The kind of restaurant where real conversations can happen. The dinner was warm. Speeches were made. I was happy. And then, between the entree and dessert, Maya stood up. His voice is completely calm. The room is very quiet. She did not raise a glass. She reached into the bag beside her chair and placed a sealed envelope on the white tablecloth. She said, there is something that needs to be said. Before the paperwork is signed tomorrow, the truth needs to be on the table. Nobody spoke. She said, that envelope contains a DNA report. Aryan is not your biological son, Rohan. He is Riyan's. He stops. Takes a breath. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. But the honest answer is, I felt nothing. Not yet. My mind was doing something I have since learned it does during extreme shock, it was simply processing the words. Running them again. Checking whether they meant what they appeared to mean. Aryan is not your biological son, she kept talking. She said she had stayed in the marriage because the company was valuable and she wanted what we had built financially. She said that now that the transfer was proceeding, and here she placed her hand on Riyan's arm, Riyan who was sitting beside her, Riyan who I now noticed for the first time had been sitting beside her the entire evening, she said they were leaving. Together. That they had been together for more than 20 years and it was time to stop pretending. 21 years. She had done this math precisely. The transfer was signed. The announcement was made. The timing was not an accident. And then Aryan stood up. My boy. 21 years old. Pale in a way I had never seen before. His jaw set in the expression that was my expression, the one I had watched him develop without realizing he had learned it from me. He looked at Maya and said, "Is this true?" She said, "Yes." He turned to me. And he said. A long pause. He said, "You're not my real father. Get out. I'm happy with them. Get out of my life." Silence in the room. I looked at him. I looked at this young man who I had read to sleep for years. Who I had taught chess and programming and how to argue a point properly. Whose robotics team I had coached. Whose Berkeley admission letter I had read 3 times. Whose 21st birthday was supposed to be the beginning of the best chapter of both our lives. I looked at him for a long moment. And then I turned my wheelchair toward the door. I did not argue. I did not shout. I did not beg. I did not overturn anything. I just left. The last sound I heard as the restaurant door closed behind me was the sound of other tables, other people's dinners, other conversations, the whole indifferent world going exactly on schedule. My driver took me home. I sat in the back seat and watched Palo Alto go past the window and I said nothing. Went to my office. I sat at my desk in the dark. I did not cry. I am telling you this not as a point of pride but as an accurate description of what happened. What I felt was too large for tears. Too structural. It was the feeling of a building whose foundation has been removed, still standing for one long moment, not yet fully understanding what has happened. 21 years. I sat there and I assembled it. All of it. Not just the betrayal of the affair. Not just the DNA. The full picture. The timing of the announcement, after the signing, before the paperwork was filed. 21 years of watching me love a child they both knew was not mine. The company funds redirected over years into a Delaware LLC. The prenatal appointments. The late meetings. The hotel rooms. The promises in a hospital room. I sat in the dark and understood, completely, that this was not a crime of passion. This was not a mistake or a weakness or a moment of poor judgment. This was a plan. Long patient. Executed with precision. By 2 people who had studied me carefully and understood exactly which levers to pull. My trust had been a resource they had identified and used. My love for my son had been the mechanism through which they intended to take everything. I sat in the dark until 2 in the morning. And then I turned on my desk lamp, opened my laptop, and began to work. First call, Marcus. 7 a.m. 40 minutes. He cleared his week. He also said, "Rohan, I almost told you. Years ago. I almost said something." And I said, "I know, Marcus. I know." And I meant it. I was not angry at him. He was protecting me. Wrong call, right instinct. Second call, my personal attorney Catherine Reeves. 9 a.m. Catherine had managed my individual affairs for 16 years and she listened to the events of the previous evening with the attentive stillness of someone already organizing next steps. I told her about the transfer. About the DNA announcement. About the witnesses. She said, "Who introduced the DNA report?" I said, "Maya." Voluntarily. In front of 14 people. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They made a significant error. Here is what they missed. The original estate planning documents, drafted 7 years earlier by professional estate attorneys, contained standard language specifying that the transfer was contingent on the beneficiary being my biological or legally adopted heir. I had not specifically intended this as protection. It was simply standard professional drafting. But Aryan Malhotra was neither my biological nor my legally adopted son. This was now established beyond any dispute, because Maya herself had introduced a DNA report, voluntarily, publicly, in front of 14 witnesses, specifically to prove this fact. She had created the evidence that voided her own plan. He shakes his head slowly. I spent my career building software systems. And the thing about software is, there is always a clause. There is always a line of code that does something nobody accounted for. The people who build carefully find their clauses. The people who move fast and assume they understand a system without reading it carefully, they get surprised. Maya had been so focused on the timing. Wait for the signing, announce immediately after, take the company. She had not examined what she was actually taking. She had not read the estate documents carefully enough to find the clause. Catherine filed the legal challenge. The court agreed. The transfer was voided. Archicor came back to me. He pauses. But that was the smallest part of what I was building. I simultaneously commissioned a full forensic audit of every transaction that had passed through Archicor during Maya's years of management. What the forensic accountants found, the Shell LLC, the inflated invoices, the redirected funds, required the involvement of federal investigators. Wire fraud. Federal charges. I presented the documentation to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in San Jose. Organized. Complete. Precise. The way I have always presented complex information. I did not attend the meeting myself. I sent Catherine and the forensic team. I stayed home and worked. Maya and Riyan were indicted 16 months after the birthday dinner. 6 weeks after the dinner. Unknown number. 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. I almost didn't answer. When I did, there was a long silence on the other end. Then a voice I knew said, "It's me. It's Aryan." He is quiet for a moment. I said nothing. He said, "She didn't tell me what was going to happen that night. She said it was a birthday celebration. I didn't know what she was going to say. I didn't know any of it." He said, "The things I said to you." He stopped. He said, "I'm outside your gate." I called to my housekeeper and told her to open the gate. We talked for 4.5 hours. It was not easy. I am not going to tell you it was a beautiful redemptive conversation where everything was healed. It was not that. Some things were said that cannot be unsaid. Some realities are permanent. The DNA was real. The biology was what it was. I was not Aryan's biological father, and we were both going to have to live with that being true for the rest of our lives. But something else was also true. He had not known. Maya had used him as the final instrument of her plan without telling him what he was participating in. He sat at that dinner table thinking he was at his own birthday celebration and discovered, along with the rest of us, that his family was not what he had understood it to be. He was also someone who had been lied to. After a long time he asked, "What happens to me now?" I thought about it. I said, "You are 21 years old. You have a Berkeley finance degree. You have a mind I watched develop for 2 decades. What you do with it is your choice." He looked at me. I said, "Archicor needs a junior financial analyst in the New York office. Entry level. The kind of position you apply for and earn. I will not give it to you. I will not block your application either. You get evaluated the same way every other candidate gets evaluated." He said, "Why would you do that? After everything?" I said, "Because I chose you for 21 years. Whoever your biological father is, I am who I am by the choices I made. Those 21 years happened. They are real. They do not disappear because of a piece of paper." I paused. "But what comes next, you earn. Same as I earned everything I have. That is not punishment. That is just how real things get built." He sat with that for a long time. When he left, Past 1 in the morning, I watched him walk to his car. I thought about an April morning in a hospital in Palo Alto. 7 pounds 2 ounces. Hands that shook. Some things are true in ways that legal documents cannot reach. I am 50 years old. I run Archicor Technologies. We have offices in Atherton, Austin, Chicago, and New York. The company is the best it has ever been. Aryan Malhotra works in our New York office. He earned the position. He has been promoted once in 3 years and will be promoted again. He calls me sometimes. Not every week. But sometimes. We are building something, the two of us, carefully, out of what is true rather than out of what we wish were true. That is slower. It is also more solid. My mother in Ohio is 81 and still asks me, every time I call, if I have been eating enough. Marcus is in Austin and calls me every Sunday morning without fail and has done so for 30 years. I am in a wheelchair. I have been in a wheelchair for 17 years. The country of walking is a place I think about sometimes, the way you think about a place you lived when you were young. With fondness. Without grief. I am okay. He looks around the room. Here is what I want to leave you with. I was a boy from Ohio with 2 suitcases and $400. I built something real. And then the most important person in my life spent 2 decades systematically taking it apart from the inside, quietly, methodically, while telling me she loved me. And I survived it. Not because I am exceptional. Not because I have some particular reservoir of strength that other people lack. Because I am a builder. When the floor disappeared, and I mean the floor, all of it, the company, the sun, the 21 years, I sat in the dark until 2 in the morning. And then I turned on the lamp. And I opened the laptop. And I started building. That is the only answer I have found to the question of what you do when everything is taken. You start building. Not out of anger. Not to prove something to the people who took from you. They are not the audience. They never were. You build because it is what you are. You build because the alternative is staying in the dark. You build because somewhere, your father is standing in the backyard of a small house in Ohio and he is looking at something he cannot quite see yet and he is taking it on faith. Honor that faith. Build. He nods once. Then he is quiet. That is my story. Thank you for listening.